Today's episode of Theoretically Speaking features Aaron Berger, Senior Vice President, Evidence Development Solutions at United Biosource. In this conversation, we're exploring direct-to-patient study designs, often called decentralized clinical trials. Hi, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Paige, for having me. I'm excited as well.
Perfect. Let's get right into it. So many people use the term decentralized clinical trials, but you've said that a critical component actually is the centralization. Can you explain why that distinction matters?
Yeah, I think that this is an important distinction that you don't hear talked about a lot when you hear about DCT or direct-to-patient study designs. Going back to the origination of the term, I think it makes sense where it came from, decentralized, because originally what we were doing was taking the capture of patient healthcare data and encounters, outside of exclusively the setting of a brick and mortar trial. So, the emergence of PRO technologies and wearables and the ability to capture healthcare data from other settings. That's what I think we meant when we started saying decentralization. But then, as these study designs have evolved, and now what we're doing at UBC is a lot of what we will call direct-to-patient study designs that don't rely exclusively upon the use of a brick-and-mortar site. What we're actually doing is centralizing a lot of activities that used to be performed amongst the distributed workforce, amongst dozens of sites across the country and their PI and study coordinator staffs that are distributed. We've now centralized those activities to a central site. So you have central PI, you have central virtual study coordinators. And so that's where I think that the term decentralization in some ways does a disservice to what we're actually doing. Because as we'll talk about later, if you're not really focused on what centralization means within the context of a direct-to-patient study and all the process and infrastructure that's required, the study won't be set up for success.
That completely makes sense, and that's really insightful and actually ties into another point about how these designs can actually impact patient success. You mentioned that direct-to-patient study designs help to overcome the barrier of healthcare providers being the sole gatekeeper to a patient's medical records. How does that shift enable more representative and diverse research populations?
Yeah, so to go back to some of the fundamental changes in the technology landscape that have allowed these different types of study designs to evolve. And for me, it goes back to 21st Century Cures Act and FHIR standards and the emergence of interoperability technologies. Mm-hmm. So let's say since the dawn of research, the primary way to get access to a patient's medical record was always through their healthcare provider. The healthcare provider has historically been the gatekeeper to the medical records. Well, 21st Century Cures and FHIR and interoperability standards, they have enabled a series of solutions to come about that allow the patient to take agency over their own medical record, and if they so choose, contribute it to research. There are also other interoperability technologies like tokenization and linkage to real-world data sets that have allowed the capture of medical records that don't require the exclusive use of the healthcare provider as that intermediary. So, broadly speaking, I call this, patient-mediated medical record release, and that has been fundamentally important to then enabling study designs that leverage that type of technology. So now, once we don't have to use just the healthcare provider, it opens up this world of possibilities, because one of the rate limiting factors for conducting, let's use the example of observational studies, post-marketing studies, and we're doing non-interventional research on these patients. You always had this limitation of the number of sites that you could enroll who had to enroll their patients. That limits you from the perspective of the diversity and representativeness of the populations you can enroll, like as you brought up. It's also an economic limitation. You can only enroll so many sites. And it's a severe limitation in the area of rare disease sometimes, when the ratio of patients to healthcare providers can be very small and the patients are few and far between, spread out around the entire country. And it becomes economically impractical to enroll every single healthcare provider that treats those patients as a site in a study. However, if you can go directly to those patients and ask them to participate, and ask them to contribute their medical records through the technologies that I mentioned earlier, well, now it's a total paradigm change. So that's how I think some of these technologies and study designs can really enhance diversity and representativeness of studies that we conduct.
Got it. So I know we touched on this a little bit, but I am curious to sort of understand what these tools enable and the potential impact that they can have on the scale of the size of these studies. So what role does the interoperability technology, things like, I know you mentioned tokenization and patient medical records release, play in making direct-to-patient models more feasible at scale?
Sure thing. So, and I touched on it a little bit, but, once we are not dealing with the constraint of a fixed number of sites. And by the way, I should mention that a lot of times the optimal model may be hybrid. It may be using some traditional brick and mortar sites. There could be very compelling reasons to do so. Engagement of healthcare providers in research is important. But let's say it is a study in a rare disease, and we are going to do some brick and mortar sites in around some centers of excellence where there are known densities of patients. And let's further suggest that this is a post-marketing study to address a safety requirement, follow-up requirement from a regulator, but also to demonstrate durability of treatment effect and long-term outcomes and value demonstration. So if we want to follow those patients' usual care journey for long periods of time, we can use some sites to do that. But then we're not getting we don't have access to the entire addressable patient population. So if we add a central site into the mix and a central PI and a team of central virtual study coordinators, and let's say we work with a patient advocacy group who has a high engagement level with a lot of the patients with this particular disease, we can recruit all of those patients to participate. Doesn't matter if they live close to one of the brick and mortar sites that we've set up. Participation is an option for all of them. They can join through, they can be consented through the central PI. They can use some of the interoperability technology I referenced to contribute their medical records. And now, the incremental, so your question was about, I think, economics and scale. For an incremental additional cost, adding that central site, the ROI that we might get from the additional patients that enroll is really a compelling story versus the same ROI you would get by simply adding more and more brick and mortar sites.
Got it. That completely makes sense. And I know understanding that technology is one piece, but sponsors can also, they care about the tangible outcomes. So I'm interested in sort of that value proposition. So from a sponsor's perspective, what are the most significant value props of moving towards direct-to-patient designs? Is it cost efficiency, recruitment speed, ability to support better longitudinal research?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, sponsors should be really thoughtful before they go into and decide that a directed patient or a hybrid model is appropriate. I'm speaking about it from the perspective of observational studies where we know that we can have a high degree of confidence that we can capture that patient's medical record, their claims data, their lab data. We also know that we can capture in the same way we would with a site-based research patient-reported outcomes and quality of life, because we can send those patients, we can have them download mobile apps or have them complete web-based surveys and whatnot. However, what we are going to get is a really real-world view of their healthcare journey. If the intentions of the study are to get a more structured or regimented series of assessments that are being performed on a schedule, if the expectations are more clinical trial-like than observational in nature, then these models may not be appropriate. It may be appropriate to conduct a study exclusively in the domain of brick and mortar sites, where protocols and investigator agreements can mandate certain procedures being performed according to a schedule. So that's a really thoughtful exercise that needs to occur up front in study planning. where on the spectrum are you trying to land your study? Is it more towards the truly real-world evidence, observational research, or does it skew more towards some mandated procedures and some more structured, uniform data capture that you're looking to achieve? So once we think through that, then we proceed on to designing either a hybrid or a direct-to-patient model.
Got it. That completely makes sense. And while these models offer exciting opportunities, they rely heavily on that centralized oversight. So I'm just curious sort of what that looks like in practice. These models, like I said, depend on that centralization of oversight, a single PI, virtual study coordinators, and centralized processes. What infrastructure or capabilities do organizations need to successfully run direct-to-patient studies?
Yeah, so here's where there's some really important considerations. I'll start with the central PI. If the study is non-interventional, meaning we're not, there's no study drug involved, there's no ordering of labs or anything of that nature, then there's not a requirement for medical licensure in every single state where the patients reside. So the profile of the central PI can be somebody who is has the requisite medical qualifications. They may be a key opinion leader in the space in that particular disease, and they need to be available for answering patient questions, helping with the consent process, reviewing safety data, and things like that. But you have a lot of flexibility in fulfilling the central PI requirement in that setting. If it is an interventional trial, by the way, then and even if it's more of an observational study, but you want to order a certain lab on a quarterly or annual basis, then medical licensure and prescriptive authority is required in the states that the patients reside. So that requires a different solution, and we've delivered that solution as well. But you need to put together a network of investigators who have licensure in all the states, and you can do that through the interstate licensure compact and a few other different ways. Two, you need to set up the processes for a central site. So remember, all those things that the study coordinators are doing, and we always say that the study coordinators are critical to any type of study's success, and that's no different if you do a central site. So we need to have qualified virtual study coordinators. Oftentimes they should be folks who used to work at brick and mortar sites as study coordinator. Now we're just putting them in a virtual setting. We need to enable them with technology that works and that allows them to have interactions with patients, like video conferencing. We need to have robust training and SOPs that they're operating under as a central site. If we're doing a particular type of chart abstraction, because these virtual study coordinators are going to be the ones who obtain the chart, just like they would be reviewing a chart at a brick and mortar site. They need to be qualified and specifically trained to review those charts, abstract data points, and put them into into the EDC. So a lot of thought has to go into setting up a really successful central site operation, and you can't underestimate what that will take. Relative to what you were doing in an exclusively brick and mortar setting.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your insights today, Aaron. That was a really great conversation.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks, Paige. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Theoretically Speaking, and that you'll tune into future episodes where we chat with pharma value evidence and access experts. Don't forget to subscribe.